So welcome everyone to our ResCom seminar this month. Today we have Renee Desai, a strategic communication and web communication lecturer at Murdoch University, Western Australia. And today she's going to be presenting to us on the process of developing, engaging and informative websites. And in terms of public awareness, I know that that is one theme, and I also know that she's going to walk us through some case study examples of websites that she's been working on. So thank you, welcome again, and pleasure to have you here, Renee.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Can you hear me?
Very well.
Good. Make sure the technology does not fail, which would be ironic in this particular topic. Hi, everyone. My name is Renee. I am a long-standing member of the PRIA. I'm a fellow of the PRIA, former board member, national board member for WA, and also former president of the National State Council in Western Australia. I'm also a product of the WA education industry, having done degrees at Curtin and at Edith Cowan University, and I'm currently desperately trying to finish my PhD at Murdoch University. So I have been around in the industry for well over a few decades now, and I am talking to you today, and I really like it to try and be a discussion. So I'm going to go through my PowerPoint that I've prepared for everybody in the first sort of 20 minutes. And I'm going to foreground a discussion around the things that I find really challenging in building websites, specifically evidence-based, research-driven websites, which is why I thought that this would be a good topic for ResCom. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is I'm also the project manager for the EduCom, the National Education Committee's EduCom portal, which myself and for my colleagues, Deb Camden, Leanne Glennie, who I know is on the call today, have been working on for a good couple of years now. And I'll be spending literally the next month building up the ResCom section in anticipation of the research symposium in December. So I just wanted to make sure I said that now, didn't forget at the end of the session today, because I'll be in touch with people over the coming months to build content for the EduCom portal, for the which is necessarily a research and education information-based website. So I'm utilising the same processes that I'm talking about today to build the EduCom portal as well. So a bit of background on me. Maddie, could you start sharing my PowerPoint, please? Thank you. Thanks. I'm a lecturer in web communication and strategic communication. I also teach health and science communication at Murdoch. And I have a particular interest in digital comms, which has come both from my academic backgrounding and also my industry backgrounding. So I started off in academia, working at Edith Cowan University, and specifically in a school of communication and multimedia. So I got really involved very early on in multimedia of all sorts. Now, this is well back before Facebook, well back before social media even took off, and even before we started using words like Web 1.0, 2.0. And I really got very interested in how specifically Web 1.0, the amazing opportunity that had for public relations and strategic communication. So I started working with IT people and graphic designers just to learn about it, because there was no way at that time as a PR person, to learn how to do HTML coding unless you did an entire degree or went to TAFE or something like that. And of course I was teaching and trying to study, and I did not have time to do that. So I learnt by doing. And after I left at ECU in 2006, I was recruited by a good friend of mine and also a fellow PRIA member, Murray Howarth, to work with her on a startup organisation that had just been bought out, interestingly, by a geographic information systems company. So this was a creative media firm firmly placed in the middle of an IT company. And that is because they had built their own custom-based .NET content management system. And again, before WordPress, Joomla, and Drupal and all those open source, open access platforms sort of came into existence. They were probably being developed at the time, but weren't yet well known. So I got to learn how to build the architecture of a content management system alongside working with these guys, these amazingly smart groups of Mark Zuckerbergs, pretty much, who were learning on the job as well how to develop technology that was user-friendly, that allowed for communications people and lay people to create their own content. And in 2006, when I started, is the same year that Facebook launched. So it was all, the industry was pumping at the time. And I was working with clients back then in mining and construction who were looking for really useful, modular and flexible pieces of tech to achieve their communication objectives. So we were coming up with comms plans and then creating the ideas around these pieces of technology to meet the objectives of these comms plans that we were working with for our clients. So I really got thrown into the deep end and really enjoyed that. And then along came the global financial crisis, and I got approached by Murdoch, who I was already working for as a casual, to go and work with them in 2008. And within 4 days, I was pulled into a project meeting for what is now known as the Australian Asbestos Network. So Maddie, if you could go to my next slide. And I realised that I have done the wrong thing, and I need to do my acknowledgement of country. Sorry, I tend to do that, run off too quickly. So before I continue, I would like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the traditional custodians of this country and its waters, and that Murdoch University stands on Noongar country, and also the home that I live in also stands on Noongar country. We pay our respects to Noongar elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their wisdom and advice in teaching and cultural knowledge activities. So Maddie can go to the next slide, thank you. So this is the original version of the Australian Asbestos Network, which is currently live on the web. So if you go and Google it now, you can find it. And what happened is I was working with, at the time, with some colleagues in journalism and history, who had been approached in a serendipitous way to work with some medical researchers at UWA on what was then the emerging National Centre for Asbestos-related Diseases. The researchers at UWA being Professor Bruce Robinson, who some of you may know was West Australian of the Year a couple of years ago, and a leading lung disease expert in the country, and Professor Bill Musk, who is a leading clinical professor in lung disease. And they had begun a program to find a cure for mesothelioma, which is the lung cancer caused by asbestos exposure. Professor Musk had been working for decades with a cohort of people who had suffered or were beginning to suffer from various asbestos-related lung conditions, who had been working in the photo of the person in the stopes literally digging into an asbestos seam in Wittenoom. And I'm not going to go into the history of Wittenoom. Many of you might already know this very sad history. Wittenoom is a town north of, in the north, in Karijini National Park, one of the most beautiful places in the world, which became the epicentre of the asbestos industrial accident and disaster that occurred in the early 20th century in Australia. Now, of course, asbestos is not just mined in Wittenoom, it's mined in other parts of Australia. Bayugal is another part in New South Wales, and it's now become a major part of the built environment in Australia. Most of us know that asbestos exists in our homes, in our workplaces. You might read an article in the news every now and again about a product, about an incident that's occurred. If you're in Canberra, you'll know of the Mr. Fluffy controversy. Most of the schools that were built previous to 1980 in Australia will have had or continue to have asbestos containing products. So we know that asbestos is an issue in Australia. It's a type 1 carcinogen, or chrysotile and chrysotolite asbestos is type 1 carcinogen as listed by the World Health Organization, and it continues to be a threat to Australian public health. The only problem is because it is so ubiquitous, it's so much part of our lives, similar to sunlight, to lead, to smoke from cigarettes, we tend to ignore it. And that has become a major public health issue in Australia, in all states. So the National Centre for Asbestos-Related Diseases, which is now going into its 11th year, we're a decade down the track now from the beginning of this project, it has done some amazing work looking for the cure for mesothelioma, and also creating care options to extend life. The problem is that mesothelioma can take up to 40 years to manifest. And when it does, the prognosis is not good, and they still haven't been able to extend the prognosis time as much as they would like, although they have done some amazing work into different types of therapies, and you can go and look at the National Centre's website if you're really interested. So I will continue on, but at this point you might want to I just want to make sure that everyone realizes that I am talking about a fairly significant health issue that does lead to cancer. So if you don't want to continue on, please feel free. I will not be upset if you do decide to drop out of the session now. I realize that it can be triggering for some people, and I have been in this space for a decade, so I completely understand. So this is the website as it stood. This is the very first iteration of the website that we created based in that original .NET system that I helped to build. It was very pretty. It was actually built by a web designer who was a fine artist. And the brief I gave him was, you need to make asbestos look pretty and engaging. And it needs to be for a flat screen, so good luck on that. And this is what he came up with. So using the colours of Wittenome, the blue and white, which is the international colours of health. If you go to any major health website, they're usually blue and white. That was not at the time intended, but these colours sort of fit very well with not just the health aspect, but also the Wittenome mining blue asbestos aspect. Maddie, can you go to the next slide, please? So this is the team that worked on the original program. Some of you might know these people. So Emerita Professor Gail Phillips, who is continuing as the Chief Investigator, is also my PhD supervisor, and the former General Manager of the ABC in WA. Associate Professor Lenore Lehman, who is an eminent historian in Australia, who has worked predominantly on stories around industrial issues like asbestos contamination. Professor Mia Lindgren, who is now the head of School of Communication at Swinburne University, who wrote her PhD and also produced a documentary called Deadly Dust on asbestos as well for the ABC. Associate Professor Chris Smythe, who is the former president of the MEAA in Australia, and also the dean of the school at the time, and it's now retired, but I've just pulled him back out of retirement to come and help me with the next iteration of the project, and he's a journalist as well, and then myself. So this project was developed, created, managed, researched and produced by communications academics and practitioners. In consultation, in collaboration with public health and medical research experts. So this is one of those real cross-collaboration, cross-disciplinary, translational research projects, although I can tell you 10 years ago it was not considered one of those. And I need to also mention that it was funded by 2 NH&MRC grants. what the first one in collaboration, the second one in our own right, which is amazing. And I'm currently going for another round of grant funding for the project as well. So going on, effectively, I'm going to skip that slide, Maddie, if that's okay, and go to the next one. So there's a book that came out of this as well called Asbestos in Australia, if you'd like to go and read that. It's really interesting, and it's written by all of those medical researchers and journalists. But I'm going to jump to the next slide, Maddie. So this is where the brief for the original Asbestos Network website came from. Now, interestingly, this took me almost 5 years to come up just with this one slide, because like you all would know as researchers, projects in humanities don't just sort of pop out of nowhere. We're not scientists where we have a research hypothesis that needs to be answered in the lab with outcomes that come within a short 3-year time frame that is required and then published in Nature. That's not how it sort of works for us. We were given a very loose brief by, in fact, I would even go to the point saying we weren't even given a brief by the group, the medical researchers. They saw the potential in a storytelling website led by narrative, led by history, that would hopefully touch the hearts of people around the country, or at least in Western Australia, even at that time, to do one thing, and that was to stop people from taking risk with asbestos in their homes and in their workplaces. We just wanted to get the message out there that this is still a real issue. It's not historical. It is in your home. It is likely somewhere in your workplace. Please do not take a hammer to it when you are renovating your home. Please check first. That is it. That is the big overarching message, the big overarching goal that we wanted to achieve way back in 2008 when we started this project, and it's still our goal today. So we wanted to tell the history. We wanted to tell the personal stories of people who had been affected, and we wanted it to become an authoritative medical and public health information source. So we brought together all of these content experts who happen to be academics as well. So it's kind of the other way around. It was designed from the very beginning to be accessible. So we took very complex information from the beginning of the medical research, but also from public health, working with the Health Department of Western Australia and the Cancer Council as well, to try and bring that content and make it look, in the end, and I remember saying this quite strongly and clearly at the very beginning of this, we just want to make it less scary. The one issue we know that we have, the one big barrier that we have to communication in asbestos in Australia, and specifically on the web, is how scary the information is, and how sad the information is too, especially on our site. So we needed to do that. We knew we had to integrate social media in some way, but to be honest, at the time we had no idea, because Facebook and Twitter had only really been around for a couple of years. We knew what they were capable of, but at the time they were still very much social networks, not what they are now, which are forums for news and collaboration and all those sorts of things. So we could see what was happening, but we weren't sure how to do that. So Maddie can go to the next one. We also engaged very strongly with industry well before we even launched the website. So we were working with what is now the national agency, which was developed by Jeff Ferry through a process called the Asbestos Management Review Panel that was set up by the federal government. And we were involved in that research stage at the beginning. We actually ran our own focus groups as well, in order to gather as much evidence as we could to then determine the best way forward for the content for the website. So as we were coming up with the information architecture, as I was talking to the designers to try and get an idea of how it did look, we were putting all of this effort into the website content itself. At the time, though, we already had audio from hundreds of hours of interviews with experts, with sufferers, with family members of sufferers. And you can, if you are at all interested, go and listen to those hours and hours of content that exists on the site. And that had been collected from 2007 right up till the launch of the site in 2010. So we already had 3 years worth of content development going on before we even launched the website. And that, of course, was all paid for by the NHMRC grant that we had been involved in. So that is the background. Fast forward to today, if you can, Maddie, and you'll, this is what's existing now. So in 2015, because the technology was no longer being supported, and I'm sure most of you have had experiences with technology not supporting websites and social media platforms and all those sorts of things, we had to make a move and migrate the content after 5 years into what is now WordPress. So like I said, when we first started, WordPress didn't exist. And 5 years down the track, we were in a completely different environment where Facebook was and Twitter were dominating the social media scene. YouTube was dominating the audiovisual market. Instagram did not exist yet, and nor did TikTok. And we were looking at, we needed to move to an open source, open access platform that was a lot easier to do, to manage. I will put my hand up and say I am not a fan of how this looks. I'm not a fan of the aesthetic, but it had to be this way because at the time we were also moving to mobile as well, and websites had to be responsive to mobile. So this is a template that was built specifically for tablets and mobile phones, where the previous one was not at all in any way, shape or form mobile oriented and very difficult for people. I'll show you how we knew this a little bit later on. So next slide, please, Maddie. So this is the new project team. I am literally in the process of pulling together a brand new content team. With, at the moment, myself and Chris Smythe are leading this, and we are in the process of doing exactly what I'm talking about today, which is building a brand new Asbestos Network, redesigning it, new look and feel, new SEO, new content strategy, new engagement strategy, new comms plan, the whole shebang. And it's all sort of happening as we speak. So the next slide, thanks, Maddie. So the new AEM project is designed to bring all of that content together that we already have, but we want to tell the new story of the third wave of asbestos, which is those people who are being affected by home renovation literally since the 1970s going forward. And they are known by epidemiologists as the third wave. So the first wave were people who were affected in the mines, and those are mostly the people we have on our current website. The second wave was people that were affected in manufacturing and in workplaces, and we have some of those stories on our website. The third wave are home renovators and home owners. And this is the wave that the medical researchers and public health experts are trying to avoid. This is the one we want to communicate with as much as we can, from millennials or pre-millennials even to Gen Z, who are starting to buy their first home, leaving home now, moving into rental properties and coming into contact with asbestos. All the way through to those people that have been homeowners for the past, 20, 30, 40 years. So it is a vast, large, diverse audience that we're trying to communicate with. But importantly, the barriers around this is that we are not an advocacy group. We do not do advocacy. There is a whole industry around that its focus is on advocacy. We do not provide direct advice on public health. We may direct people to their state public health information. We do not provide legal advice, although I'm always being asked for it, left, right, and centre. We don't promote asbestos services of any kind, although I'm always being asked to advertise constantly, and we don't provide personal medical queries. So one of the problems that I have faced, which is why I call the very final chapter of my PhD the never-ending research project, is because we have become a hub for communication. Necessarily because the Australian, specifically Australian asbestos communication and information environment is vast and overcluttered. There are so many websites out there now that didn't exist 10 years ago that providing similar advice but conflicting advice. So I've been following the digital COVID communication issue, obviously, for the last year, and I find so many similarities with asbestos and how people seek information out, what they look for, and then for what they run with. And what we're trying to do is just be a voice in that environment by providing a website that is engaging, that is not scary, that provides information, that is clearly credible and authoritative, but isn't pushing a particular line. And that is where the Asbestos Network is now. Maddie, can you go to the next slide? So I'm just going to show you some information now before I start talking about these particular issues. Those of you who use Google Analytics might have seen a screen like this before. I switched Google Analytics on the site the day that it launched on the 22nd of November in 2010. So have well over, wow, where are we, 2021? Well over a decade worth of analytics data for this website, which is, you know, for a data nerd like me, absolutely gold and amazing. And the one thing that I've loved about this project is I use this to teach web analytics at Murdoch. So the students gain access to real analytics and can see how we've made decisions about content over time. So one of the things that we were asked is, you know, is it an Australian website? Yes, it absolutely is, but is not just an Australian website. It has touched many parts of the world. In fact, most parts of the world where there's internet penetration, we have touched. So we started off with the idea, our first goal was to get to Western Australians and then to Australians, but we've actually gotten to people all over the world. And I have queries coming in by email regularly from the UK, from Canada, from the US. We've made alliances with organisations in the US and the UK, and of course in various parts of Southeast Asia, particularly in India and in Singapore, all over the place, primarily because asbestos is being widely used in most of the developing world, and it is still being mined in parts of the developed world. So I won't go into that, it's political, get me very upset. But yeah, people are being exposed to new forms of asbestos all the time in building products and in their built environment. And we're lucky enough in Australia to not have that. However, we only banned it in 2003. So it's still an issue all over the world. So I'm just going to jump, Maddie, if I can, to the very last slide about the AAN, which is slide number 15. So effectively, what we're trying to do is develop the story around the third wave by creating new content for those stories. So going out and interviewing people or asking people to submit their own stories in the form of blogs or videos and get some more user-generated content. We're trying to develop the medical and public health information 10 years on because a lot has been done in that time. We are building, and I'm currently writing, a social media platform strategy that I'm going to hopefully be implementing with a number of other organisations in the space. So we're banding together on this rather than trying to go it alone. I'm currently building a digital media production plan, which involves podcasting, apps, and new visual and textual content, and a stakeholder and community engagement plan, which I need to get actually underway next week because we have our first big project meeting next week. And of course, looking for industry partnerships and grants. So if anyone's listening and they're keen to be involved in this project, please email me because I'm looking for academic and industry collaboration all over the country. So if you're keen or know somebody, please send them my way. So let's just jump into the conversation on the key elements of building a website. Actually, I might maybe just for a second stop there. Chris, do you want to open for questions or any comments at this point?
Yes, please. Now, I don't know through chat or through voice, but that would be good if people would like to.
Yeah, please pop your audio on if you want to chat, or just pop it in the chat box. I'll open the chat box so I can see what's going on. If not, we might just sort of continue on at this point, and then maybe come to the end and open it for the discussion. So search engine optimization. Okay, so SEO is an interesting area to be involved in. I will start this off by saying I don't work in paid SEO. So I'm not talking about search engine marketing, SEM, or even paid search where you pay Google or the Facebook, the social media platforms for keywords. Necessarily, because what we do is evidence-based research. So we're not looking to see the impact of paid comms. We are looking to see what organically the keywords are that our audience uses and that our audience engage with, which is why if you ever build a website, it's imperative to turn Google Analytics on the day that you launch, if not a few days before, while you're creating that launch plan, because those analytics in the first week, first 2 weeks, even in the first month are critical to show you how people are engaging with your website. So search engine optimization is really important because it helps to determine your content strategy and information architecture strategy. Now, there are 2 ways to go about this. The first one is if you're building a brand new website like we were with the Asbestos Network back in 2008, you're going to make assumptions, and those need to be educated assumptions based on previous evidence from other sources of data. So, and that data might be entirely circumstantial based on your experience, or it might be from other websites that you've looked at, or wherever you get your preliminary qualitative and quantitative data from. But website analytics provides hard quantitative data as soon as you launch to then adjust the assumptions that you've made over time. And I can't tell you how many times I have adjusted the navigation of this website in the live period, which was between 2010 and 2016. And we're about to do it again. So SEO is, from a comms perspective, not necessarily from a design perspective, but from a comms perspective, is all about information architecture and content strategy, and continuing and looking at those things as fluid rather than, a hard piece of information on a piece of paper. These are fluid ideas that need to be changeable, which is the beauty of a website as opposed to any other form of comms. Next slide, thanks, Maddie. And then, of course, you get to what information architecture is. And I've had this conversation quite often because people tend to misunderstand IA as a user experience thing, so as a design thing that the web designer does or the web developer does, which is entirely untrue. Information architecture is squarely in the realm of comms. And we have been doing this for a very long time. It's just been given a name to help us understand what it is that we've actually been doing. We are information architects. We are probably some of the first information architects, but we've always been applying it in a different way. And this is where we can really and we are already doing this, bring our skill set from comms into the web environment, into strategic web communication. And I use the Information Architecture Institute definition of IA when I'm teaching, because I just think it helps make it really easy for people to understand. So IA is all about the structural design of shared information environments, which makes perfect sense. And I like this, the art and science of organizing and labeling websites and intranets and online communities to support usability and findability. And those 2 words that are so important to IA. And it is an emerging community of practice, especially in web, has always been there in say, for example, library studies. You often think about IA as a library studies domain, but it's now squarely in web and strategic communication and PR more broadly. Next one, please. And so I found this other definition that I love and I use and still very relevant today, that IA is the practice or the effort of organising and relating information in a way that simplifies how people navigate and use content on the web. And in a nutshell, that is what we're trying to do with good websites, with informative websites, where the IA allows the content to sing. It allows for that rich content, that rich information, and we're not so worried about clicks, for example, which is clicks are very squarely in search engine marketing. We're looking more at how do we put this information together in a way that makes sense and doesn't confuse people. So they have to click down 3 or 4 pages before they even get to the important information. It's said, kind of like the inverted pyramid style of media release writing. It's not in any way, shape, or form a complex idea, except when you come to trying to do it in practice. And what we did with the Asbestos Network, because all of these ideas were fairly new at the time, and I had been doing it practically for clients for a few years, but because the information, if you can imagine thinking about asbestos communication as a blank page in front of you, and in fact we used very traditional brainstorming techniques with brown paper and crayons at the very beginning to try and come up with some sort of structure. We thought of it very much like a book, an online book. The book that we wanted to publish, the Asbestos in Australia, how do we make that a website? And that's where we started. And it worked for a little while until we realized with the analytics that nope, that's not how people engage online. They don't come into your homepage and then diligently follow your instructions. Click here now and go to this next page, which I tried to do, funnily, and I laugh now. I did have those sorts of instructions on the website very early on. But it's the beauty of information architecture on the web and web analytics particularly. The audience told us that that's not how they were engaging. So a good year on, I changed that, the IA to represent how it was that most people were engaging with the content. Thank you to Google. One of the only things I thank Google for is because of that. Next slide, please. So importantly, we need to understand that usability is a critical success factor, and good IA, regardless of whether or not it's in existence or it's new, lays the groundwork for this, for usability for our users. And if you can just keep that in mind, everything flows from this. Regardless of whether or not you've got a website, huge website, and I know some of you might be thinking, oh my gosh, but Renee, I've got a website with 100 pages on the web already. What do I do? I know that's horribly daunting because I'm doing the same thing with my own site. But we just need to come back to this core comms idea, that to determine what the key message is first, determine what we want to achieve. What is our goal? Come back to the content, do the content recce, and be hard on yourself. Take stuff down that doesn't need to be there. Pull material into one page. And that is where your information architecture strategy will start to emerge and show you what it needs to do. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that I print out. I have on my desk in my office, and I also give to my students. Information is content, architecture is links. Therefore, information architecture is about content and links. And a large part of SEO is content and links. So information architecture is all about, builds into your SEO strategy. And link building helps you to start developing what could potentially go right in the future, what might go wrong, and to avoid as much as possible those issues that could land you in hot water down the track. So IA is linked to content strategy, linked to search engine optimization, and a core component of digital web communication strategy, and needs to be in your strategy statement first and right up front. Okay, so next slide. So how do we do this? Well, the two goals of effective IA: make it easy to use and make it easy to find. If you can't find it, then you pretty much don't exist. And we all know this. If you're not in the top 10, on that first page, top 10 search outcomes for a keyword market for any website that you're working with, you pretty much don't exist. People very rarely go to page 2 or even 3 of Google unless they're desperately searching for something and they can't find it, or have a particular reason to be searching deep into the web. Even scrolling down to that bottom page of the top of the first page is you start losing people, and that's why SEO is so important. So easy to use, enact your SEO strategy. Make sure that your keywords are all over your website, and that is part of your content strategy, but also easy to find through searching and browsing. So these two things sort of become part of each other. Once you launch and that you start collecting your analytics and doing focus groups and finding out how people are engaging with you, you can tweak those components. So let's move on to content strategy, which of course is linked directly to IA. This is kind of what PR people lead. This is what we're good at. Content is our thing, and I know this is very old and people don't tend to use this term anymore, but content is king. There is no such thing as websites driven by anything other than excellent content. There are billions of dollars made in the social media platforms around content. So we know that it's important, and it can't be a secondary thought. It needs to be developed alongside the web communication campaign plan. And in most cases, as PR people, we're thinking content before we're thinking strategy anyway. It's how our brains work. So it's the practice of planning for the creation, development, delivery, and governance of useful and usable content, or redeveloping if you're, already have a content strategy in place and it needs to be revised. Next slide, Maddie, please. It's the way in which we communicate with our stakeholders through various lenses, and those lenses, and I'm preaching to the converted, and also not telling you to suck eggs at all. This is just a slide just to move through, but it's obviously about copy, about video, about audio, and about pictures. How do we use that engaging information and material? And what is, for your website, what version of that is going to work best? For us, we knew that audio was going to be, and this was pretty innovative 10 years ago, audio was going to be the thing that drew people in. And we were right. That's one of the hypotheses that absolutely came out in the research. That listening to people is a very engaging, intimate experience. And so when you're dealing with something as scary as cancer, or something that can potentially cause cancer, listening to somebody's story tends to be less invasive than seeing a picture of, cancer on the screen in front of you, which can be very, very confronting. But of course has its place when it comes to whatever, the strategy is. So our strategy was to draw people into the story, to lead with story. And of course, being written primarily by radio journalists, that's where we were led from. I was very much a traditional copy-oriented public relations person. And the historian Lenore was also very much a writer as opposed to an audio person, but bringing those three things together, and then also providing a pictorial archive, a historical pictorial archive, just hit the sweet spot. And our analytics have borne out since then. And the Asbestos Network was turned into an ERA impact case study in 2018 because of that, necessarily because of that high impact of the content on delivering the goals of the NH and MRC projects. next slide's strategy. So, sorry, sorry, Maddie, I didn't mean to call you strategy. We'll jump to the one after that about search engine optimization and content. So, evaluation and metrics. So, content strategy is where SEO comes together with social media and comes together with a keyword strategy and your overall IA. And the way to then measure that is through metrics and using at your disposal any sort of data that you have, and particularly web data. Next slide. I just want to make the point that because all these things are crucial elements of the production process, we have to think of two things when we're creating these strategies. The one is to remember that we're building our websites for our known audience, but we're also building them for the unknown audience. And this is actually quite difficult to do. Google and other organizations and scholars around the world call these the short tail and the long tail search engine optimization. So short tail is really the 20% of searches that you know are in existence. You might have data on those through your web analytics. You might be able to get data on those through other types of secondary research. And that 20% is the audience that you know about. So you can segment that audience. You can even do a stakeholder analysis on that audience. We know who they are. They're active publics. In some cases, they're stakeholders. The real comms, the real challenge is that long tail, the unknown audience, those people who use very specific keyword search terms that might only come to your website once or twice. We really want to bring them into our known audience and maximize the retention rate on websites, especially for websites, informative public information websites, where you want people to come back to you over and over again, and you become the primary hub of information for a particular issue. So they're not going to you and then going to several other websites and social media platforms. This is the big goal that we're trying to achieve with the Asbestos Network, which is going to take, I think, at least another 5 to 10 years to achieve that. So we need to do that analysis on our known audience. We need to identify who we think our unknown audience is and how we're going to then use our search engine optimization strategy to draw that audience to us. And of course, that comes back to content and information architecture. So one of the ideas that I've been enacting rather than just playing with, is this idea of web research as a strategy, not just, which is not a new idea to anybody in this room. The idea that quality content is key to SEO and can only be created through a thorough research process. So this, where we're talking about evidence-based content, which those of us in academia, if you have the funding, and I'm going to make sure I clarify my next statement with this, if you have the funding to do this, we have the luxury of undertaking research programs that can develop evidence-based content. I am very much aware that my projects are funded, and therefore I have the time to do these things, and not everybody does. And in fact, it's expected of us as research outcomes. And then, of course, IA and content strategy is completely reliant on quality research data. And this doesn't have to be as costly or difficult as it sounds. It took us 3 years to develop our content, but that wasn't a research strategy. It was research, so practice as research. But what we're doing now is definitely become a part of our process. So we go and we look at content that other people are developing. We might even focus group our own content. We might run surveys on our own content and get our users involved in the development of that content Then we put the content up and we test it in live by seeing how people are reacting with our web analytics. And it's really, yes, it takes a bit of time and money, but it's not as onerous as it sounds, which I know is one of the reasons that stops website owners from engaging in serious research before launching content. It necessarily because they just don't have the money. So of course, next slide. Thanks, Maddie. Web research is also evaluation. It kind of has to be. We're launching into research and evaluation month in November, and so there'll be a lot of discussion around this, a lot of content. And I'll plug the Educom. A lot of that content will be on the Educom in November. But we're looking at the research activities aimed at assigning methods to aims and objectives. And we all know now that counting Facebook and YouTube followers and likes is not good enough anymore. It doesn't talk about engagement, and there is a much deeper, strong and more rich environment, research environment available to us on the web that can provide us more insight than just how many people like us. But we understand that in industry, Facebook likes mean something. They mean money, as do Instagram shares and Instagram follows. So what we're trying to do is develop a bit of a framework that can support that and give us more insight. And we need to understand how to do that.
With time running a little short, Renee, can we maybe go to a question or?
Yep. I've literally on my very last slide.
Please go on. Yeah.
Maddie, can you just jump to slide 33? So this is the one that I just want to leave with everybody, and we can talk about web analytics and web research. When building these new websites, when determining information architecture, these are the things that the data can be used for. And the digital persona is the main one, information architecture, social media, web browser optimization, mobile device optimization, content development, creative design development, and trend analysis, just to give you an idea. And these are the things that you can do every day on a daily basis using the analytics that you either have access to or develop your research strategy around in order to build these big and informative, long-term and sustainable websites. That's it.
Thank you so much, Renee. And we'll throw to questions in a moment. I guess Maddie will control the technology there. It was very energetic, which is nice. Passion, I think, is really important. Insights into asbestos, the issue, and websites, and demystified a lot of things. I think it's interesting that, and you alluded to this, that you're kind of highlighting in the issue of the asbestos and disease, an issue that's gone a bit quiet, but one that's not in any way, shape, or form gone away, which is something that a point you made well and reinforced. So I will look for questions on chat. I don't know whether people can join in at this point, Maddie. And
I've asked anyone if they have a question that they want to just pop their hand up, like the raise hand function. Otherwise, they can pop them in the chat or in our Q&A option down the bottom of the screen.
Good.
Don't be shy.
While we're waiting for a question, I see we haven't got one yet. In the focus groups, and when it comes to the issue of websites and usability and so on, what were some of the pet hates that stand out?
I wouldn't say there's pet hates, but people have definitely moved. The best practice now in search is what Google's doing. So it's based on people will look for something that is specific to them, and they don't really want options. Back in the day, people would be given options. They would even be prompted for options, and now people don't want that. They want to find what they're looking for specifically. However, it depends on the information domain. So for something like asbestos, people don't know what they don't know, and Google doesn't provide the opportunity for people to find what they don't know. It only, very similar to COVID and very similar to any public health really, people are going to go look for something that's ailing them or something that's scaring them and ignore everything else. And what we're trying to do with the Asbestos Network is ensure that they don't ignore the whole system, the whole approach. We have to anticipate, and in the focus groups, we find the questions that people ask Google or the keywords that they put in are not necessarily the ones that we think they're going to. And that's borne out in the web analytics as well, because of course Google Analytics can give you a list of what people are looking for. I think pet peeves are no one wants to click more than once or twice. We're lazy. And they will leave very quickly if they don't find. It's the bounce rate on a website. You're trying to reduce bounce rate as much as you can. You don't want people just hitting your homepage going, oh, that's not what I'm looking for, see you later, when all of the good content is in the website itself. So yeah, people don't like to.
Our attention spans are just diminishing all the time, aren't they?
Yeah. And over the last 10 years, less and less and less.
One thing that I'll just say what I think of this and go to the next question is that it's interesting and demystifying for a lot of us when it comes to websites, but there's an element there. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Lots of your points about getting the communication right, and it all builds from there. And knowing what your key messages are. I've got one here. Great presentation. Are you using WordPress? Well, you were, but you might want to talk about that. And for the new website, yes. And you did talk about WordPress. I mean, perhaps for people who are not that yet familiar with it, maybe a few words on that, Renee.
Yes. WordPress is a great platform. It's, you can you could launch a WordPress website overnight. It's very user-friendly. It takes a little bit of training, but not too much. It's like using Word, and that's the whole point of it. But of course, the industry has sprung up around these open access platforms. So where you might be able to run the whole thing, if you're not a web designer, you can't build templates for it. So you still need to work with web designers, which is no different to working on any other sort of web platform. So it's changed, and it just allows content managers like us to have more direct access and more direct control over our content. And as long as you don't delete your homepage, which I have done before, don't ever do that. Number one rule of web. As long as you don't delete the homepage and you can play around with that content and change the information architecture as you see fit, which I like. Whereas the previous proprietary software platforms like the .NET one that I was working with were very much web developer oriented. So you had to have expertise and you had to have someone there. And if it went down, it was a nightmare, all those sorts of things. So yeah, we probably will use WordPress. I'm allowing my colleagues who I work with at Murdoch who are in that space to look at new platforms that they might want to use, that are easier, that are more responsive, all those sorts of things. But in the end, it's likely we're going to do a whole content migration. The one thing that will change is the look and feel. I really want to go back to that fine art, which I know is bucking the trend in corporate comms, but in storytelling, it's very much, where it's at. So I need to bridge those two together, which is not easy to do. So I might be asking to do a focus group with Priya just to help get ideas from everybody on what you think it should look like and where we should go with it.
That certainly seems to me well worth doing for such a challenge. Definitely.
Yeah, and I'm not a creative. I work with creatives. I know how to talk to creatives and get the best out of creatives. But I'm a stick figure person. So I know what I like, and that's about it. Which is, a bit of a problem.
We can't be all things to all people, can we?
No.
But
no.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate. We're creative to a point, and then it's sort of, and a part of that is knowing what we like.
Yeah.
or knowing what we don't like.
I think one of the things that I get talked to with comms people a lot. Is it afraid of the website production process? I'm like, it's no different to producing a video. It really isn't. It's yes, it's a lot of moving parts and all those sorts of things, but in the end, it's a static image on a screen. That you can turn on and shut off as much as you like, and it's no different to the same production process that you would go through to building a corporate video or producing a brochure, but it is a lot more flexible, and there are things that really need to take into consideration so that you're not spending money going forward. And I think the one thing that we learned, because we were dealing with precious NHMRC money, which is usually put aside to buy, CT scanners or things to cure cancer. We were very mindful of that. And I think that's what set my mindset at the beginning was I have to be careful with this money that I've been given and not waste it. And so put best practice into place as much as I can. And it worked because the site has been running technically unfunded, although it is funded in a way, for 10 years. And we've been able to really build longevity into that website. And now I'm thinking, how am I going to make it last for the next, 10 years without it costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, which we just don't have access to, and the government won't give. So
it sparks the thought, some of what you're saying there, that and I personally, in my mind, link it to the right of a web, and you've talked a little bit about where we're at with that, but it's become a more what are we now, citizen users or something like that perhaps, but you know what I mean, and it's not that difficult to get involved, and as you say, now what you're specifically talking about is the level of building something. It's we don't need to think of it as being drastically different from a well-designed poster or brochure.
And that's how I built the Educom. I mean, I literally launched the Educom overnight and got in and went boom, 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 boom. I mean, I know how to do that. I know, you do have to have a certain level of understanding, but it is something that anyone can do. And it does frustrate me when not-for-profit organizations are not able to launch a good web plan or get something out there. And I spend a lot of time trying to connect my student consultants out to not-for-profits for this exact reason. Because it isn't as difficult to do anymore. Now, I'm not talking corporate. Corporate is a completely different environment. It is not the same as research, government and non-government, NGO and not-for-profit web communication in any way, shape or form. So those of you who are listening to me going, it costs a lot of money. It does cost a lot of money in corporate, but the ideas are the same. It's just one, you've got a budget, the other one, you don't have a budget. One, it might be long term, the other one might be short term. It's just same strategic thinking has to go into it. And
it's a good distinction between the samenesses and the differences, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you for a great presentation. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and the energy behind it, and the importance of the issue as well. That you've decided to invest in for the betterment of us all. So thank you once again, Renee.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming along, everyone that's here. I know it's Friday, Friday morning, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'll also be presenting at the symposium on my PhD research, if anyone's interested in popping in, listening to that as well.
And did you want to give, just before we go, do you want to give one last call out for people who might like to contact you?
Sure. Yep. So you can find me easily by Googling me, Renee Desai, but my email address is r.desai@murdoch.edu.au. And two things. If you're interested in contributing content to the Educom portal, contact me about that as well, or Chris or anybody on the education committee. But also, if you're interested in the Asbestos Network, if you have a personal story that you would like to share, or if you're interested in getting involved in the project in some way, please email me, because I'm open to all collaboration at the moment.
I hope that encourages people to come. And so thank you once again. I'll hand over to Maddie if you want to do a final wind up.
No, thank you both. I think we're good to wrap up. And Renee, I think if you ever need that focus group, feel free to reach out, and I'm sure we can get something with the rest of the prayer cohort.
Yep. Thank you, Maddie.
No problem. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.